Hi everyone, my name is Ray and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to give you 15 new signs that you are awakening to your spiritual path, that you have begun the ascension process. Some of these signs you might perceive as negative, but you should always know that just before the sunrise, that's the time that the night is at its darkest time. So let's begin. The first sign is intense motivation to change something in your life. And what do I mean by the intense motivation? Suddenly, something that you haven't really touched in many, many years, but you have been feeling guilty about it, or you have been in denial about it. Something that can be huge, like changing your job because you feel like you have gone beyond that job, or you feel like it doesn't really represent the energy that you want to give in the planet, in your specific position and in your story, as one might say. Big is changing your relationship because it no longer serves you, or you're not afraid anymore of being alone for a particular amount of time. But it can also be something small. For example, for many, many years you have neglected your physical body, and now you want to go exercise a few times a week, and now you're actually doing it. So it's an immense motivation for a particular change that you haven't had so far. So until now you have been in your comfort zone, and now suddenly you're moving out of your comfort zone, and something, not you, is motivating you to make the right choice. Now this happens because you are actually elevating your frequency, again, in the ascension process. You're more closer to your higher self, so you're less burdened by the ego, and it's that thing that keeps you in your comfort zone. Our next sign is highly creative bursts. In other words, for me, for example, I became an artist after my initiation, or after my pranic living lifestyle began. And ever since then, I understood how much the base chakra and the energy that comes out of that, our creation, I understood how much the soul wants to be creative. In other words, it's God's expansion that we are actually fulfilling here. And the only thing that it wants is to be creative, for the negative, for the positive, to explore all dimensions in all ways, through all perspectives, in all planets, in all animals, in all people. So anything that we want that is actually new, and that is what is called creative. So suddenly you feel the urge to, try a new course online, find a new mentor, learn something new, create some art. You want to explore new places, or maybe move an apartment. You want to explore new ways of look, changing your haircut. You want to be more creative with your life. And that is, by the way, a really, really big sign that you are beginning that amazing journey into a total awakening. The next sign is changing sleeping patterns. In other words, you used to know how much you needed to sleep. Suddenly you sleep a little bit less. Suddenly you sleep a little bit more than what you used to. Suddenly you're waking up in the middle of a sleeping cycle and not in the end of the sleeping cycle. And it all surprises you. Now, the most common one is sleeping less. Sleeping less, it means I suddenly wake up at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning. My physical body and my consciousness have rested enough. Now, there's a lot of things I can tell you about why we need to sleep less. And a part of them is that we are actually living our dream. Another part is that we are connecting more with our higher consciousness. But I'm going to make a whole video. I think I have made a video about sleeping cycles in the past. But you already know that sleeping is when your consciousness and unconscious mind, your 3D personality and ego, are actually syncing up with that potential of a higher self that is in the 5D, a higher vibration. The next sign is that you have moments of bliss and joy. Now, these moments might be very, very short, but they can actually last for days. I've had 2 Kundalini awakenings in my life, and the Kundalini awakening is when you actually feel the energy of Kundalini that starts from the base of your spine, just moving up. And this is like any psychedelic that you might have taken. This is like being in love with life itself for a short duration of time. It lasted up to 3 days. For some people, it lasts only 5 minutes. Now, for you, you might be able to suddenly see and glimpse and say, wow, that is a beautiful tree. Or wow, today the sun is really out and everything is shining in my face. You might be able to suddenly see and glimpse and say, wow, that is a beautiful tree. Or wow, today the sun is really out and everything is shining in my face. In other words, suddenly you become happy for no apparent reason, without an external reason. Meaning you are beginning to see that life actually can be fun, and it's not only challenges, and you're focusing more on the positive. The next sign is sudden waves of emotions. Now, these can be up in a positive way and can be down suddenly, even though you are a very mental person who completely controls his day-to-day character and never abrupts in any, even thoughts of violence or negativity. Suddenly you feel like you're angry and you're pissed off, or you're depressed in some way, or you're sad, and you have no idea why, because there's no actual reason for that happening. But what is actually happening underneath the surface is that there are issues that are coming up to be cleansed. In other words, we are quite along in the story of our ascension, even though people are looking forward into the future, asking, when is it going to come? When is it going to come? When is it going to come? Instead of understanding, it's here, it's here, it's here. You are experiencing it, okay? And these are the signs that you are actually experiencing it. So, positive modes and suddenly lower modes in your life. But those are very, very huge signs that you are actually on that ascension process. Our next sign is actually a change in diet. And what do I mean a change in diet? Suddenly, you feel more attracted to higher vibrational food. And occasionally, because you still have that programming of having non-high vibrational food, cooked food, cookies, chocolates, and stuff like that, you will notice that you are slowly moving into high vibration. And that means that more people are becoming vegetarian, more people are becoming vegan, and we won't go into why. I think it's pretty obvious that when we are highly motivated spiritually, then we actually have worked on our compassion. And therefore, we don't need an explanation. We just understand that, hypothetically, we agree with not eating animals or suffer or make animals suffer, and yet on the physical plane, we still haven't moved that into action. So now we're actually moving that into action. Now, beyond that, when they discover that a vegetarian or a vegan type of diet actually makes you feel quite good, you sleep less, you're more happy, you have more energy and stuff, people actually move on into the different types of diets. In other words, a raw food diet, and then a liquidarian diet or a fruitarian, and then a breatharian or pranic living, which means that you hardly ever eat and stuff like that. So you will notice a change. The other type of change in diet is that you are remembering old tastes and flavors, which actually connect you with the previous one, the previous sign, which means I'm still dealing with different emotions that come up to the surface in order to be healed. For example, there's a lot of foods that come from our house, from our grandmother, from our mother, from people like that in our life, and we still have stories associated with that. And when we are remembering those type of foods, we actually crave them because in some way we want to solve that story or that trauma. And so it's being surfaced up again in order to be healed. So when we remember that, we actually attach to that. So sometimes it's just about a memory or attachment that we have to something in our past. So that again, it can be high or low vibration food, but it's just about that attachment. Our next sign, heat surges. Now, what do I mean? I mean that sometimes you actually feel like your body is getting warmer. Now, I don't know if you know, but on physics, when something is warmer, meaning a molecule, it's not that the molecule itself changes. In other words, the molecule is built out of several atoms that are together, but they are actually vibrating faster. In other words, heat is vibration. And that's why sometimes when we are in an intense emotional struggle, and sometimes when we get sick and stuff like that, the body actually has to make itself warmer. In case of a disease, the body actually heats itself up in order to avoid, and kill the bacteria or the virus. That's why we get fever most of the time. But the same thing can actually happen here. So one of these things, and it doesn't happen, it's quite uncommon, but one of these things is heat surges, and sometimes your heart is going to go much, much faster. It's not going to be for a prolonged period of time, but it's definitely going to be noticeable. Next runner-up is much faster synchronicity and manifestation abilities. Now, half of my channel is about manifestation, teaching you tricks and understanding why synchronicity works. Now, when you are in a higher vibration, when you are on your spiritual path and making those big steps, you will start noticing that your thoughts and your intentions, your emotions, are actually happening much, much faster now. In other words, they are happening on an accelerated rate, much faster than you would imagine before. So sometimes when you imagine something or visualize it that you really, really want it, the best example for you is to look back a year or 2 years ago into the past and see how long you have actually come so far. And then it will be clear to you that when you compare the last year and you compare the year before that, the last year had much more synchronicity and manifestation and change than the year before that and the year before that. So it's not a linear, but sort of like an accelerated way or method. Very, very clear, very noticeable, just when you compare yourself to what happened last year. The next new sign is that you're actually looking younger and you're more vivid. In other words, you suddenly, do you understand that, the physical body has a minus 15 plus 15 year? In other words, you may be 40, but your body can actually be 25. And your body can actually be 55. And that all depends on your habits, your addictions, your food, how much toxins you have. But this actually helps when you're elevating your frequency and on your spiritual path. One of the things is that you're going to look younger. So you feel younger, you actually exercise a little bit more, you start hanging out with people who make you feel younger because you understand that your friends right now or the people that you hang out with normally actually make you feel a little bit old, so you judge them for it. Why aren't we going out more? Why aren't we doing some things that are fun like we used to? Why do we have to be depressed like all, the grown-up and adults that lost their life right after they started to get this job that they know they're going to hold on to until they're 70? So you actually feel younger and it radiates in some way. You smile a little bit more, you take things super easy and in blissful manner. You understand that a lot of things are now under your control, much more than you thought you had before. Plus, you use the tool of letting go of the expectation of things that you want to control. On the one side, you have more control. On the other side, you understand that everything will come at the perfect timing, and you let go of the expectation of that control. Next sign is that you have vivid and powerful dreams. Now, some of you, if you've watched some of the videos I made about lucid dreaming and how to wake up inside a dream, you probably notice that you're beginning to remember the end of your dream just before you wake up in the morning. Now, it's not that the whole night you had dreams, but some of the dreams in the morning are very, very important to you. And it's a signpost because you're actually communicating with your higher self in another way. So it's not only, dreams are not arbitrary things that your subconscious is bringing up. Dreams are your experience in the astral plane as it is brought back through symbols from your life in order for you to learn a particular lesson. Now, not all dreams are like that, but usually the most powerful ones that you remember in the morning are. So now you have more dreams, more powerful dreams, and it's time for you to communicate with your higher self through those dreams. In other words, there's a lesson to be learned, there is something that needs to be interpreted from that dream. And this is one of those signs that you have more powerful dreams. The next sign is that you're beginning to have life-changing events. It can be something like, if I would look back, really, only 4 years ago, at my job, at the women I used to date, where I lived or how much I traveled, and my body, everything has started to change. Now, a life-changing event can be that you're just moving an apartment to a house. A life-changing event is that you are getting married. A life-changing event, and these things are happening more and more in front of you, even though you thought you already have them. A life-changing event can be even that you adopted a beautiful dog and is now going to be with you for your entire life, and they're taking care of you, and like you're taking care of them. So these type of events are actually starting to happen to you in an accelerated pace. You think that you've already done most of them and that it's time to rest, but no, there's a lot more coming ahead, if that's your intention, of course. The next sign for an awakening is that you want to break free from society's paradigms. In other words, you want to break free from the rules, from the standards. You want to be more and more yourself, and now you feel it more than ever. So you suddenly understand how unique you are. Of course, we are all unique, on the grander plan and stuff. But now you're perceiving it as something that is different, and you're accepting yourself as you are with what you used to define as your disadvantages. So you understand that you are perfect, and you're starting to step away from any rule or standard or something that somebody else told you that you shouldn't do. And you actually take it as something, as motivation to, wow, I am unique, I am special. I'm moving away from what is called normal. And normal, by the way, in our world right now is not that good. In other words, normal people will watch the news most of the time, and that actually serves to limit us in some way and reduce our frequency and show us only the negative things in the world. A normal person doesn't take care of himself. A normal person does not meditate or do yoga or exercise quite often. A normal person will avoid many topics. Anything that has to do with aliens, anything that has to do with conspiracy theories, everything that has to do with whatever the dark organized side doesn't really want us to see and talk about. Okay, and I can tell you that I personally have been attacked on multiple levels, on a conscious level, spiritual level, and on the physical plane as well, because I've brought to light different subjects that they didn't want me or others don't want me to talk about, especially things that hurt the three biggest industries, which is the medicine industry, which is the food industry, and the weapons industry. The next sign is that you're beginning to have existential questioning. In other words, you understand a little bit more of who and what you are. You're beginning to create this amazing puzzle of questions because you think that you know, but you know that you don't know. And there's a relaxation and there's a simplicity, but it comes in waves. So when I'm saying that you are having existential questioning, it means that you, on one hand, you think you know, so you have this like understanding. I am a soul and a soul incarnates and there's more of us here. And on the other hand, you keep questioning because that is a part of your spiritual path. You always want to know more. And eventually you're going to discover that you're only giving the information and the tools that you need for this life. So it doesn't matter how much you explore beyond death, God, again, existential questioning, you're only going to be receiving whatever it is in that box in order for you to reach your next step. But you're beginning to trust that, and you're beginning to let go of the expectation of actually knowing everything that you need to know. And that means that you're moving much more into the present moment, just like a child or a cat or an animal. And that's a part of the enjoyment of, our spiritual awakening. Our next sign, and this is one before last, is that different teachers begin to appear in your life. So it's different mentors, different YouTubers, different books that you can actually see now because you are actually ready for it. People like me that are teaching you something that is very, very unique about yourself. People like Til or Bentino or Bashar, or you're opening yourself up to different channelers. You're suddenly listening to the Pleiadians or to the Arcturians or to the High Councils, and different things like that just begin appearing as you are ready for them. And that actually means that you're ready to take your next step. And trust me, you're going to discover a lot more of these. I know because I'm a part of an organization of 47 of these. And I know who they are, and I know when people are going to be ready to actually awaken to some of their truths. But the ultimate truth, it's just the Jesus truth, okay? Love is everything. But we are slowly learning that, and we are going back there with the challenges of being in such high condensed light, which is called the lower vibration world and stuff like that. So these type of mentors, guides, they might appear in different ways. They'll be suddenly on your YouTube feed. This is how a lot of my students tell me that they find me when I ask them, like, how did you get here? Oh, I was researching dry fasting and I was researching spirituality, and suddenly a little Ray Maor appeared on my feed. And I was like, yeah, right. Suddenly. A coincidence. Synchronicity at its finest, by the way. And our last one, which is pretty obvious, but still needs to be said, is that time is accelerating. In other words, the days, the weeks, the months suddenly feel like they're moving much, much faster than they did before. So when we compare, again, the last 2 years to 2 years, 10 years ago, we suddenly realize that we don't really recognize the person that we are today. And it's quite amazing because we have made such big leaps, such big progress, working on our emotions, working on our physical body, working on our spiritual ascension, working on our old programs and unlimiting beliefs and stuff like that. So time itself is accelerating, Gaia itself is changing, the human existence and the human, we can say, story or experience is also accelerating. And there's an explanation for that. It has to do with time itself on the 3D plane, moving into a faster time and moving much more into the moment. And when we are in the moment much more, then we feel less the way that time is. In other words, we're having more fun, and therefore time flies much faster, right? We know this because when we're having less fun, time feels like it's like we're going through hell, pretty much, and everything slows down so we can enjoy our suffering much more. So my friends, this has been 15 signposts along the way. If you enjoy this and you want to get more of my information, some of my articles and stuff, join my newsletter at raymaor.com. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to my channel. My friends, thank you very much for watching me. My name is Ray, and namaste, and I'll see you in my next video.